Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you. I'm just going to give you a little bit of a taste of what I do. I work in two spaces, sport business and also in racial equity, education and strategy. And I do that at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and the University of Virginia. And if I can start my slides, there we go. So I'd like to read this quote to you. I found it rather compelling considering where we are today. People intentionally created the unfair systems and structures that exist today. It is that intentionality that gives us hope. It means that together we can intentionally remake them. Dr. Besser. Now this tagline was used, it used to be about improving health and healthcare. Now it's about improving health and health equity. So this is where we are. People are talking about it, but what are we going to do about it? It's always been about power. It's always been about power. It's not a needs assessment. It's not a needs analysis. It's a power analysis that's needed. It's necessary to understand why outcomes continue to remain the same for certain communities. We need to understand power. We need to understand how it works. Untapped potential. Untapped potential is present and it's immense. So how did it begin? I want to go back and talk about why we are having engagement with communities. What are the roots? What caused this inequality, this inequity? I believe history is very, very important. It's the why of community-based participatory research. So I love this slide. It's from Drs. Bird and Little at Harvard, Clayton, at Harvard. Harvard physicians, Harvard researchers. And it really, for me, it's nice, clean slide on terms of how we got to where we are today. In particular, African Americans. From 1619, when that first ship arrived, the White Lion, on the shores of the Virginia colony, modern day Hampton, Virginia, with 20 Africans. I'm not going to debate like some scholars in terms of whether or not they were enslaved or whether or not they were indentured, but for 246 years, people were unfree. Chattel slavery, worth no more than a pig or a horse or a cow. 246 years of our nation's history. Now, there was something else going on during these 246 years. A country was being birthed. Just about every system and institution that we enjoy today was built during this time period. And was the time period of white supremacy theology. Advantage. So that's important to understand and not to forget. And so then we have another 100 years, 13th Amendment. Enslavement is no longer legal, except for the punishment of a crime, but that's a whole nother workshop. But for the next 100 years until the civil rights era, we had what's called Jim Crow. Legal segregation. State sanctioned, state supported. So we're talking about 346 years or 87% of our nation's history, people being held behind. Communities of color, but I'm particularly talking about African Americans, Blacks, because we are at a Black Men's Brain Health Conference. 87% of our nation's history. So fast forward to 2023, still about 13%. Only 13% of our nation's history have we been working on this. And yet there are people out there saying, oh, get over it. It happened a long time ago. What are you talking about? My grandmother's mother saw enslavement. So this is very, very real. It's very present for us. 87% of our nation's history. Another way to look at it, I love this exercise that Dr. Mutha did at North Carolina A&T. Now she's a senior administrator there, but she was a professor in the School of Education, teaching graduate students, teachers. And she used Monopoly to teach the history and to help people to better understand how we got to where we are today. And so she asked her students to play the game of Monopoly. And you all remember this amazing game, one of the best games ever created by Hasbro. You all remember your favorite game piece that you would use to represent yourself on the game board, right? The thimble, the car, the hat, the ship, right? Do you all remember how much money you got if you passed go? $200, right? Does anybody remember how much money you got to start the game from the banker? It's about $1,500, right? And you go around the game board trying to buy properties because the purpose of the game was to bankrupt your opponents. And you did that by buying real estate. I remember my favorites were always the orange and the yellow, right? Try to get on Boardwalk. It's an amazing game. And so she would have the Black students play first, the Black teachers. They would go around and around about 7 rounds, playing the game, acquiring properties, high-fiving, dapping, everything. While the white students, the white teachers sat and watched. And you can imagine how uncomfortable that was. Frustrated, why can't we play? What's going on here? This isn't fair. But she was teaching. But eventually she would let the white students play. And they would get everything that the Black students would get. Now, all the game pieces were probably gone, so they'd have to get a dime or a penny or paper clip, balled up piece of paper to represent them on the board. But they were very noticeable, right? They didn't look like the other game pieces. But they would get $200. If they passed go, they got $1,500 to start the game. So the way that I laid that out, truly this is equality, right? They got everything that the Black teachers got, the Black students. But what they didn't get was that head start. Right? So it's equal, but it's not equitable. It's not equitable. And so this was so powerful, she had it written up in the Journal of Multicultural Education, and these are the findings. If you'd like to look this up, the name of the article is called "When the Rules Are Fair, but the Game Isn't." The group that begins the game first always produces the winner. The first group is the best predictor of success or failure. Winners typically are in the same sequence as the order of the players entering the game. The subsequent groups seldom build assets that equal those of the first group. The initial stages are very frustrated for late entering groups, very, very frustrating. Discouraged by their inability to get a lead in the game, the groups that start late often roll their die, wishing to land in jail so they could just be and not have to pay out. See the parallels? Groups that start later often lose their motivation to continue to play the game. I call this the power of delayed access. The power of delayed access. Being shut out from property acquisition for most of the game, it limits future prospects and social mobility. African Americans escaped the identity of chattel only to be restricted from owning property themselves, our ancestors. So CBPR needed, required, but understanding the history and how we got to where we are today, and how we have to move out of our comfy offices and home office and be with the people. The power of delayed access. So I go back to this chart because being someone who has hope, who believes in hope, which is different from optimism. There's nothing in the history that would say that these systems, these structures that were built will change on their own. I am hopeful because if we've only been working on this for 13% of our nation's history, just think when we get to 40% or 60% or 80% with all of our efforts. So we can be hopeful in the midst of the brutal facts. We have to be. I want to talk about language. If I had more time with you, I would go through my laundry list of being mindful of language and how it's so important in this space. Words evolve in this space when we're working with communities of color. It is important for us to understand how language is changing. I have a list of about 30 different terms and words that I continue to build upon and listen. So I'm bringing up just a few of them. Gentrification. We've heard that, but a more powerful word for me is to always add displacement. That paints a picture so people can see actually what's going on. Minority. This is moving out of favor. And I know there are a lot of governmental agencies and a lot of reports that require this word. But when you're with the community, when you talk to the community, it can be very offensive. And so we've had an evolution. So we use people of color. I love that more people are using minoritized, as in something is happening to people. Melanated, untapped. Privilege and advantage. There is no doubt that we all have to work together. White, brown, blue. And we use this word ally. I particularly don't like the word ally because it assumes that someone in our nature, in our socialization, that someone is standing behind you or beside you. And we need people to lead. We need white people to lead other white people. We need brown and black people to lead brown and black people. Do we come together? Absolutely. But when we go out and we say we're in these conversations and people mention white privilege, that can be pretty offensive to a white person that doesn't have two nickels to rub together, if they don't come from great wealth. So consider using the word advantage, because wherever you are on the socioeconomic spectrum, white people have advantage over people of color. Now, there are some people who are privileged and advantaged. Everybody in this room. We have cars, or we have money to use shared rides. We know where that we can turn the heat on or the air conditioning on. We can travel, right? That's privilege. But when you're trying to engage with people in the community, be careful with throwing out the phrase white privilege. You have white privilege. Try advantage instead. We've done research with people who are unhoused, and they talk about this. This is a much more powerful phrase, because they know that they can sit on the park bench longer, a white unhoused man, longer than an African-American, Latino, Native American can, before a park ranger or law enforcement comes and says, hey, keep it moving, you can't sleep here. A white man knows that, many unhoused white men know that they can go into a hotel, go to the atrium, look around, find the restroom, go in there, slick their hair back, put a magazine under their arm, and eat off of the breakfast buffet. A man of color, as soon as they walk into the atrium, as soon as they walk into the lobby, where's your room key? What conference are you here for? Advantage exists. PWI, definitely moving out of favor because it doesn't tell the full story. Predominantly white institutions, whether it's Virginia, North Carolina, UCLA, Michigan, Texas Tech, they're exclusionary, exclusive to whites. And that's why we have HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities. So we change that. We say now HWCUs or HWI so that people can understand the history. Now, HBCUs, they were always open to everyone. And in fact, there's 2 HBCUs now that are actually have more white enrollees than Black. Now, we're not going to change the name of HBCUs, right? That has a lot of history, a lot of meaning. But we're trying to get people to understand the history of these institutions, that they were historically white. And it just didn't kind of happen overnight that it became predominantly white. Vulnerable versus at risk. This is another one that's happening. I've also heard people mentioning safe space a lot today. In my work and a lot of other persons in this space, we try to make sure that we say, be careful saying safe space. We say brave space, Because sometimes people will take safe space as in, I'm not going to say much. I don't have to say anything. I don't want to speak the truth. I don't want to have real talk because I'm trying to make sure everybody's safe. It is a brave space. It is a brave space. So again, I have many, many more words, more phrases that are changing, but please be mindful of language in this space. It is certainly evolving. Best practices, I just have several that I want to share with you. The first is thinking about community-based participatory research. Most people are familiar with this and they adopt the phrase, but it's really primarily anchored in research, the research process. And many are using the term community-based participatory practices, as in it reflects a broader array of practices related to participatory activities that include and extend beyond research. And so we have some examples there, but consider the language there. It might be appropriate to use research, it might be appropriate to use practices. Best practice number one, understand how community is defined for your priority population. You might have to be more specific. It's not enough to just say the Black community, the Latino community, or the Asian American community. When we think about the ladder of engagement, outreach is the lowest level of community involvement. You're talking about informing people. The other parts of that ladder, we move to consultation, we move to involvement, and certainly that buzzword on our college campuses is collaboration. But the highest level that we should all aspire to go to reach is having shared leadership. It is the gold standard. The community co-creates or drives the agenda. Their voice is amplified in ultimate decision-making. The most engagement and potentially impactful work is done when communities and outside entities engage on an equal level. So yes, I am back to talking about power, shared power. To serve the people, you must love the people. And to love the people, you must spend time with the people. You must spend time with the people. Voices from the field, one key informant who leads a CBPR evaluation firm emphasized that the field has become focused on techniques of engagement and has lost focus on the fundamental purpose of CBPR, CBPP, to change the balance of power in research projects and communities at large. This is tension-filled because you think about your funding, you think about tenure and promotion, you're thinking about the people who pay your bills, but we're talking about moving to a model of shared power. Communities must have control over their information, the ability to use it in ways that support their own goals. Now, mind you, I just talked about a system and structures that have been built for 346 years. How do we move that ship? How do we turn that Titanic? We have to have these conversations, or we will continue to do the same thing over and over, which you all know the definition of, expecting different results. Often the collaborative projects offer opportunities for representation at various levels, but the real goal is that they are controlling bodies for the determination, collection, and representation of the data about their communities. This real critique argues that there are too few projects that engage in shared leadership in the context of this research. Shared power. Build and nurture Black researchers, period. If you have the mindset, if you have the will, if you have the skill, this is the work that must be done. There is no doubt that leadership is lonely. And I know I could probably speak to every Black person in this room that we've been the only one in so many settings. Decision-making meetings, service projects. We need to build this team. It's the only way we're going to get it done. And if you have the opportunity to showcase Black researchers, Black scientists, Black lecturers, please do so. Oftentimes I'm asked to come in and speak to, the equity situation. How do we get more people involved? Do we just want to, try and raid all the HBCUs and bring their professors over? There are other ways to do this. We have to be creative. We have to be imaginative. Some people like the setting of a historically Black institution. But can we partner? Can we Zoom them in? Can we ask them to do a lecture versus bringing in the same people over and over? Our white, brown, and Black students need exposure to Black scientists, the Black researchers. Invite them into your institution to do a guest lecture. This is important. And then lastly, ask for help. Okay, looks like we went dead there. That's the last one. There we go. Ask for help. I think about my students, my top students, the A students, they're the ones who ask for help. It's the C students who don't. And so as we know, we can't do this work by ourselves. And so I'm so glad that we're having so much engagement. Share what your objectives are, what you're about, and ask for help. Don't forget the history. Don't forget that education, racial equity education is key to healthy relationships. Thank you, and I appreciate all of you being here. Thank you.